In the West, a man dies one of two ways. He dies on his feet, in the open, facing what's coming, under a sky wide enough to witness it. Or he dies alone, in a dark room, with no one to carry the story out. William Holden knew which one was coming for him. He said so out loud, years before it happened, in the plain language of a man who has already made his peace with the trail ahead. "I know how it's going to be," he said. "Lonely, alone, without dignity." In November of 1981, in a Santa Monica apartment with the Pacific Ocean just beyond the window, William Holden, Academy Award winner, the #1 box office star in America for 5 straight years, the man who rode beside legends and drank with presidents, slipped on a rug and struck his head on the corner of a bedside table. And with a telephone sitting just feet away, he bled out on the floor and did not reach for it. Nobody found him for 4 days. Every great Western ends with a man riding toward the horizon. Some ride into the sunset in glory. Some fall in the dust without a witness. This is the story of the one who fell in the dust. Golden Boy rides into town. Every gunfighter has a town he rode out of. For William Holden, it was Pasadena, California, the son of a chemist and a schoolteacher with a disposition as straight and unyielding as a surveyor's line. Born William Franklin Beadle Jr. in 1918, he grew up with the California sun on his back and the kind of clean-cut jaw that studios once built empires around. He wasn't looking to be a hired gun. He drifted into the Pasadena Playhouse the way a rider drifts into a town on a dry afternoon, without a fixed destination. A Paramount talent scout spotted him there in 1937, saw the face, and signed him before the boy had time to think twice. They changed his name the way a new territory changes a man's reputation. "Beetle sounds like an insect," the scout said. They reached for the name of a casting agent's ex-wife, Gloria Holden, and pinned it on him like a sheriff's badge that belonged to someone else. William Holden, a name borrowed from a stranger. He would wear it for the rest of his life without ever quite filling it the way it seemed to demand. His first real test came fast. Columbia Pictures threw him into Golden Boy, 1939, a starring role that called for a seasoned performer, and got a 21-year-old who had barely fired his gun in anger. Within days of shooting, the studio was ready to run him out of town. The person who blocked the door was Barbara Stanwyck. Already a legend, already a force of nature in her own right, Stanwyck looked at the frightened kid and saw something the executives couldn't. She told the studio chief, "Fire this man and I walk." Then she spent her own evenings coaching Holden, line by line, scene by scene, until the young actor found his footing. Golden Boy became a hit, and every year after that, without fail, on the anniversary of the first day of filming, William Holden sent Barbara Stanwyck a bouquet of flowers. Every single year. That was the code by which he tried to live. Loyalty to the ones who stood by you. Gratitude paid in ritual and repetition. In any Western worth its salt, that's the mark of a man worth riding with. But every rider also carries something in his saddlebag he doesn't talk about. Something heavy enough to slow the horse down on the long ride home. William Holden's weight had a name, and it came in a bottle. Riding at the top of the ridge. After serving in the Army Air Forces during World War II, shuffling papers at a desk while his brother flew combat missions and did not come home, Holden returned to Hollywood, older, quieter, and carrying guilt he would never speak of directly. Then, in 1950, Billy Wilder handed him a role that fit like a holster worn to the shape of one particular hand. Sunset Boulevard. The story of a washed-up screenwriter so desperate he allows himself to be drawn into the decaying mansion of a faded, silent film queen. The film opens with the man already dead, floating face down in a swimming pool, narrating his own destruction with the cold, unblinking hindsight of a man who saw every wrong turn and took them anyway. It was a role about a man who couldn't outride his own worst choices. Holden played it like he knew the territory from memory. The Oscar nomination followed. The Oscar itself arrived 3 years later, in 1954, for Stalag 17, his portrayal of Sefton, the cynical, self-interested loner in a German POW camp. A man who hides whatever decency he carries behind a wall of contempt, because in his experience, The world tends to shoot at anything that looks soft. He won against Brando. He won against Clift. And then came the golden decade. From 1954 to 1958, William Holden appeared on the box office top 10 every single year. He was the most bankable star in Hollywood. In 1956, he topped the entire list. In 1954 alone, he appeared in 4 major films: Sabrina, The Country Girl, Executive Suite, The Bridges at Toko Ri. 4 films in 1 calendar year, all of them hits. His best financial draw of the trigger came with The Bridge on the River Kwai in 1957. Holden negotiated something almost unheard of in that era: 10% of the gross profits from the film. Not a salary, not points on the back end. 10% of everything that came in. When the film became a worldwide phenomenon, that deal made him one of the richest actors who had ever lived. He earned millions from that single picture alone. He was 39. He had an Oscar, a fortune, and the most recognized face in the world. He also had a marriage falling apart, a thirst that no amount of success could slake, and an affair with Audrey Hepburn that cut him to the bone when it ended, because he had told her, too late, that he could never give her the children she wanted. That he had kept this truth from her for months while she fell in love with a future they could never share. "I really was in love with Audrey," he said later quietly, "but she wouldn't marry me." In the West, a man takes his losses and rides on. He doesn't always ride straight. What the saloon takes. The great tragedy of the Western hero is not that he faces enemies. It's that his enemies are often inside the saloon he walks into every night by choice. William Holden had been drinking since the beginning. Those close to him traced it back to Golden Boy, to the anxiety of a man who never fully believed he had earned his place at the table, who needed something to quiet the voice that told him he was one bad performance away from being nobody again. The fame never silenced that voice. It amplified it. By the early 1960s, his marriage to actress Brenda Marshall was a ghost town, occupied in name only, the building still standing, but the life long since moved on. They had been separated more than they had been together across 2 decades. He took lovers wherever he traveled. She built her own separate life. They remained technically married for 30 years, not out of love, but out of the same stubborn inertia that keeps a man in a dying town, because leaving requires admitting there's nothing left. His drinking, his biographers noted, made him ugly in ways his face never did. The charm he wore in public was genuine, but peel it back far enough in the dark hours of the night, and what emerged was something harder, more destructive, more willing to damage the people nearby. The good roles dried up with the decade. Younger gunslingers, McQueen, Newman, Beatty, rode into the territory, and the studios turned their attention the way the frontier always turns toward whatever's newest. Holden began appearing in pictures that didn't deserve him, going through the motions with the competence of a hired gun who's been at this long enough that he can do the job half asleep. And then came the night in Italy that changed everything. Blood on the Tuscan Road. August 1966, near Pisa, Italy. William Holden behind the wheel of a car, drunk and moving too fast through the dark. He hit another vehicle. The driver of that car was killed. He was charged with vehicular manslaughter. He received a suspended sentence of 8 months. He served not a single day. His name and his lawyers accomplished what the law alone would not have allowed. In the Code of the West, there is no concept more central than consequence. A man pulls the trigger, he answers for the bullet. The frontier does not negotiate on the basis of reputation. The dust does not care whose name is on the marquee. Holden never went to prison, but the verdict he served was handed down inside himself, and there was no appeal and no parole. Friends who knew him before and after Italy said the guilt transformed his drinking from a coping mechanism into something that felt, at the deepest level, more like a sentence he was executing on himself. As if the man had decided he had come out ahead of a bargain he had no right to win, and spent the rest of his years trying to correct the imbalance. Brenda Marshall, who had endured decades of the marriage, was finished. They separated permanently after Italy. Their divorce came through in 1971, after 30 years. The accident is the hinge on which William Holden's story swings. Everything before it is the story of a man who might still be saved. Everything after it is the story of a man riding toward a destination he has already chosen, the last frontier. But here's what the simple telling of this story always gets wrong. Because at the same time William Holden was riding toward ruin, he was also building something that no Western hero in any picture ever quite managed. Something real and lasting and alive. Africa had taken hold of him in the 1950s. He had gone on safari the way a man rides into new country, not knowing what he's looking for, recognizing it the instant he sees it. The East African plains, the herds moving at dusk across ground unmarked by civilization, the silence of a wilderness that did not know or care about Hollywood. He fell for all of it the way a man falls for a woman who tells him no comfortable lies. In 1959, he co-founded the Mount Kenya Safari Club. In 1967, watching herds diminish from poaching and encroachment, he bought the surrounding 1,200 acres and founded the Mount Kenya Game Ranch, the first wildlife conservation facility of its kind in all of East Africa. He relocated 37 species of breeding herds to that land. He funded it out of his own pocket, working Hollywood pictures not because he loved them anymore, but because they paid for the animals. For 23 years, he told a television crew he invited to the ranch in 1980, I really haven't done much to publicize what we've been doing, going out and capturing rhino or elephant or giraffe. There's going to be a day when I don't feel like doing it anymore. In 1972, the ranch brought him Stephanie Powers. He encountered her at a New York bookstore reading a travel guide to Kenya. He invited her to come and see his work. She came. For 9 years, she was the most stabilizing force in a life that had precious few of them. When she was present, he drank less. When she was away, filming, traveling, the old darkness filled the rooms she left empty. He was doing something in Kenya that mattered more than anything he had ever done in front of a camera. The ranch still stands. The William Holden Wildlife Foundation, which Powers established in his name after his death, serves over 11,000 Kenyan students every year. He was building a frontier worth claiming long before the world understood that wildlife conservation was worth claiming. But a man can homestead the most beautiful territory on earth and still choose to sleep outside in the cold, when the West itself was dying. The role that came closest to telling the whole truth about William Holden was the one he played in 1969, in the dust of a Sam Peckinpah Western that changed American cinema forever. The Wild Bunch. Pike Bishop. An aging outlaw. A man who has ridden the old trails so long he knows every one of them ends somewhere he doesn't want to be. His gang is shrinking. The world that made sense to them, the world where a fast gun and a strong horse and a code of rough honor could carry a man, is disappearing beneath railroads and motor cars and the efficient modern machinery of law and consequence. Pike knows this. He says so. And he leads his men toward one last, violent, doomed act of commitment, not because it will save anything, but because a man who lives by a code must die by it, or he was never living by it at all. Holden was 51 when he played Pike Bishop. He looked older. He moved like a man carrying weight the camera could almost see. He was not acting. 7 years later, Sidney Lumet cast him in Network, Paddy Chayefsky's scorched earth portrait of a television industry eating itself alive. Holden played Max Schumacher, a veteran executive watching everything he helped build consumed by spectacle and cynicism. A man who falls into an affair with a younger woman, knowing the whole time it will wreck him, doing it anyway because the alternative is the silence of a life he no longer recognizes as his own. Critics wrote that Holden brought the look of a man who has been used to the screen. It was his third Academy Award nomination. It was also, in retrospect, the most honest performance of his career, because the exhaustion and the resignation and the dignity through gritted teeth were not constructed. They were retrieved. The West always produces its clearest truth in the men who are riding out of it. The prophecy of a dying gunfighter. In the tradition of the Western, the old gunfighter knows when his time has come. He doesn't rage against it. He saddles up, rides to the edge of town, and says what needs to be said with the economy of a man who has never wasted words. William Holden's addiction counselor told him directly, sometime in his later years, that the drinking would kill him. Not might, would. Holden heard this. He nodded, or didn't. And then he said the words that anyone who has studied his life knows by heart now. I know how it's going to be. Lonely, alone, without dignity. He said it the way Pike Bishop says, "Let's go" before the final walk. Not with self-pity, not with drama. With the flat acceptance of a man who has taken his own measure and come up honest about the result. In the autumn of 1981, he wrapped his 81st and final film, Blake Edwards's S.O.B. The director described him, without sentimentality, as a loner. He elaborated. Sometimes he'd just get in his car and drive. I'm not surprised that this could have happened. Stephanie Powers was in Hawaii filming Heart to Heart when she noticed the silence. He had stopped answering his phone. She left messages. She knew what the silence meant. I knew he was off the wagon, she wrote. She came back to California as fast as she could. She was too late. Glenn Ford, one of the last friends standing, was confirmed by the coroner's investigators as the last man to see William Holden alive. What passed between them that night, Ford never said. He offered only, "Yeah, I guess I was the last one to see Bill alive." That's a line that belongs in a Western, spoken at a bar, in a town that's about to get quieter. The night in the territory. The night of November 12, 1981, was not the death of a gunfighter in the open, not the final ride through the canyon under a hard sky with the sun dropping red at the horizon. It was smaller than that, more honest than that. William Holden drank through the evening. The coroner's reconstruction estimated 8 to 10 drinks, vodka, before he moved toward his bedroom. His blood alcohol level, measured at autopsy, was 0.22, more than twice the legal limit in California at the time. He caught the edge of a throw rug. He went down. His forehead struck the sharp corner of a teak bedside table, opening a 2-inch gash above his right eye. The impact drove the table backwards with enough force to punch a 2-inch hole in the wall behind it. The investigators noted this with the precision of people trained to see violence without flinching. He was conscious for at least 30 minutes after the fall. The evidence was clear. He gathered tissues and pressed them against the wound. The rug beneath him soaked through. The tissues piled up. He was aware. He was trying. The telephone was in the apartment. He did not call. No one can say why. The alcohol may have blunted his understanding of how badly he was hurt. Or, and this is the question that sits at the center of his story like a stone at the bottom of a dry well, perhaps William Holden, who had predicted this moment so clearly and so early, simply did not reach for the thing that would have saved him. He lost consciousness. He bled to death on his bedroom floor. He was 63 years old. Per the instructions he had left in writing, carefully, deliberately, there was no funeral, no memorial, no ceremony. The Neptune Society cremated him, and his ashes were scattered in the Pacific Ocean. The man who had been best man at a president's wedding, who had been celebrated on every continent, who had been worshipped by millions, he was committed to the sea in silence, with no one watching. A gunfighter without Boot Hill, a legend buried without a marker. He had asked for exactly that, a ridge with no rider. The tributes came, as they always do. The press releases, the solemn statements, the obituaries measuring a life in column inches. Ronald Reagan, his friend for 3 decades, released a statement from the White House. I have a great feeling of grief. We were close friends for many years. What do you say about a longtime friend? A sense of personal loss. A fine man. Our friendship never waned. Billy Wilder, the director who understood Holden better than almost anyone, said later that if he had been told Holden was dead, his mind would have gone immediately to the frontier. To a water buffalo in Kenya. To a plane going down over Hong Kong. To some violent and dramatic end that matched the scale of the man. Not this. Not this, Wilder said. The tribute that the Western Code would recognize as the true one came in March 1982 at the Academy Awards. Barbara Stanwyck, the woman who had once stood between him and a firing squad of studio executives, the woman who received flowers from him every year without fail for over 40 years, accepted an honorary Oscar. At the end of her speech, the composure broke the way it only does when the grief is real. "I loved him very much," she said, "and I miss him. He always wished that I would get an Oscar, and so tonight, my golden boy, you got your wish." The audience went silent. Then the applause came up like thunder after lightning. He wasn't in the room. He was in the ocean. The songwriter Suzanne Vega, a few years later, wrote a line about an actor who had died while he was drinking. She confirmed later that she was thinking of Holden. His death had become, in the memory of a culture, a particular kind of Western ending, the one where the man sees the canyon coming, knows the bridge is out, and rides forward anyway, because he has been riding so long that stopping is the one thing he no longer knows how to do. The code he couldn't keep. In every great Western, the hero lives and dies by a code. Loyalty, honesty, the willingness to stand in the open and face what's coming. These are not complicated values. They are simply hard ones. William Holden kept the code in every direction but one. He was loyal to Stanwyck, to Africa, to the animals of a ranch that still bears his name. He built something in Kenya that 11,000 students walk through every year, learning about a wilderness he loved enough to fund with his career. He was conserving a frontier decades before the world thought to call it that. He was honest about what he was, at least to himself, and occasionally out loud. Lonely, alone, without dignity. There is no dishonesty in that. That is a man looking at his own reflection in the still water of a mountain stream and reporting exactly what he sees. But the code of the West also demands that a man fight for his life when fighting remains possible. That when the bullet hits and the blood is running and the telephone is 3 feet away, a man reaches for it. That survival, when survival is still on the table, is not something you decline. William Holden declined. Whether that was the alcohol making the decision or something deeper and longer and harder to name, no one still alive can say for certain. What can be said is this: he had predicted his ending in exact terms. He had been warned by people who loved him. He had every reason. Africa, Stephanie Powers, the animals and the students and the legacy still growing on the slopes of Mount Kenya, to pick up the phone. He did not. "I know how it's going to be," he said. "The ridge at sundown is empty now. The rider is gone. And what he left behind, the Oscar, the ranch, the films that still unsettle and move and refuse to age, and the flowers that arrived every year at Barbara Stanwyck's door, is more than most men leave who die in beds with their boots off and their families gathered round." But the great Western truth is this: the most important thing a man leaves behind is not the land or the legend. It's whether anybody was there when he needed them most. William Holden made sure nobody was. That is the loneliest death in Hollywood. If this story stayed with you, hit subscribe. These are the lives that deserve to be told all the way to the end. And I want to know what you think in the comments. Was William Holden a man destroyed by his demons, or a man who made his last choice deliberately, in full knowledge of what he was doing? I'll see you in the next one.